Pagination, 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 pagination.
Hello, let's start with the bare bones of an HTML5 web document. Mine is named Pagination example.php. The first thing I'm going to do is go up above my doc type and I'm going to put in my opening PHP tag, and then I'm going to go down a couple of lines and put in my closing PHP tag. Now, since we're going to be querying a MySQL database for all of our data that's going to be paginated, we're going to need a MySQLi based connection to the database. So you have to establish a MySQLi connection, and you do that right here at the top of your script or somewhere near the top. You just have to make sure that that is in place before you try to query anything from the database. And if you need to see what this MySQLi connection.php file looks like, you can look at one of the first few tutorials in the social network building series that we did not too long ago. Shows all of the inner workings of that MySQLi connection file. But I'm just going to assume from past tutorials that you guys have watched of mine that you know how to make a MySQLi connection to your database. So basically you're just going to include that connection file right there. So I'm going to place in my SQL syntax, and you're going to see that I'm tapping into my testimonials table in my database, and I'm going to use that as a real live example. So towards the end of the video I'll show you the script working at developphp.com to render out my testimonials in paginated results instead of one giant list. Now we run the query against the database, and this is a MySQLi based query. So we put in the connection variable first, and the second parameter that we put in is our SQL syntax, which you could take all of this SQL syntax right here and just put it right there if you want, but I like separating mine out like that. Now we're going to access the row for that query result set, because all this query doing is getting a count of how many rows are in the testimonials table, where approved field is equal to 1. And many times you wouldn't have any conditions in there. You might just be listing out or trying to get the total count from your testimonials table or your products table or your whatever table. But since I have a little condition in there, I just want to make sure that the testimonial is approved before everybody can see it in the list. So in my database I have an enum field called approved, and it's set to 0 at first, and then when I approve the testimonial that people write in, then it becomes a 1. So I just want to make sure that I'm counting only the approved testimonials. Now in the very next line we're going to type ourselves a comment in that says, here we have the total row count, by specifying the row variable here and then accessing its first and only index, because we're only selecting one item from the testimonials table, which is the count. So you're really only going to have one array item in that row index. So you access the first one, and that gives you the total count of rows from this testimonials table. So here we have the total row count. Now in the very next line we're going to type in another comment that says, this is the number of results we want displayed per page. So let's create that variable now. We're going to name that variable page rows, and we're going to make it equal to 10 because I want 10 items to be listed on each page. Basically I want 10 testimonials to come out on each page, so I make this page rows variable equal to 10. If you want only 5 items to be on each page, just make that a 5, and you can play with that number all you want. Now we're going to place in another variable. Well, first let's place in a comment to tell us what this variable represents. The comment reads, this tells us the page number of our last page. So let's put that variable into place now, because we have to know what is the very last page of the results set according to how many rows are going to be laid out on each page. So we name the variable last, and we run the ceil function, which is a math function in PHP, and we say rows, which is the full rows count from the database, divided by 10 basically, or whatever you made this number. And that gives you, that little calculation result gives you the last page variable. So if your result set from your database is paged out into 88 different pages, then this last variable will be 88. And ceil is just a way to round the number up, because when you divide this number, or when you divide rows by page rows, you don't really want a floating point number or anything. You want a number without any decimals. That's the only reason we're running ceil on this little equation here. Now since some of the variables are going to be in the URL, that means people can manipulate the variables, and so we're going to put in another comment that says, this makes sure last cannot be less than 1. So let's put a little if condition right here just to make sure that last can never be less than 1 before our script processes that variable. So this if condition reads, if last is less than 1, then we make last equal to 1. Now let's write in another comment that says establish the page num variable. So page num is going to be equal to 1 by default, but it's going to be changed down here in the script when we gather the URL variable for the page number. So let's write in another comment to ourselves that says get the page num from the URL variables if it is present. If it's not present, we're going to make it equal to 1 by establishing it right here as 1. So basically you establish page num variable as 1 here, and then we're going to see if there's a get variable set of pn, because that's what we're going to name our variable when we send it through the URL. So we say if is set the get variable of pn, then we're going to gather up that get variable of pn, and it's going to represent a number whichever page the user wants to go to. We got to make sure that we run preg replace over that and filter it to where it's only numbers that can be in that URL variable. So only if that variable is set. If that variable is not set in the URL, the pn variable, then page num is going to be equal to 1 every time, unless it's set in the pn variable. But if it is set in the URL, then page num variable becomes whatever this pn URL variable is in the address bar. After you go through the tutorial, you can go ahead and remove all of these comment lines, and that'll make your script a lot slimmer and make it look a lot smaller. But just keep the comments there until you fully understand each line or each segment of code. Okay, so right under all of that, we're going to place in another comment that says this makes sure the page number isn't below 1 or more than our last page variable. So we don't want page num to ever be below a 1 or more than the last page. And this little condition will handle that. We say if the page num is less than 1, then the page num is equal to 1. So basically somebody can take the URL address bar and change it from 1 or whatever page they're on to 0, and what you want to do is make sure that you change that 0 to a 1. So if it happens to be less than a 1, then we change page num to 1. Else, if the page num is greater than the last page number, then page num is going to be equal to last. So basically, if you have 88 pages of results and somebody changes that 88, the last page in the URL address bar, maybe they change it to a 92, you just want to make sure that that doesn't process in your script, and you change page num from 92 that they input to 88. So this if condition, or this if and else if condition, just make sure that the page number isn't below a 1 or more than your last page. Now let's put in another comment that says this sets the range of rows to query for the chosen page number, and that looks like this. We make a limit variable, and this limit variable is going to be sunk right into our next query. Remember, this query up top, this one was just to find the full count of how many rows there are. So we're going to need another query that actually runs a while loop and gets results out. But we have to limit that query because we only want a certain amount of items out of the database, but only according to what page it represents. Do you understand? So if you're on page 3, you don't want to gather all of the first rows in the database. You want to make sure you gather a result set that corresponds to that page 3. So you really have to understand the limit syntax for SQL. If you don't understand the limit and what limit does in an SQL query, then you're not going to understand this tutorial. So what you want to do is make sure you look into and make sure that you understand what limit does in SQL queries. It just limits how many you're grabbing out of the database. Now let me put in the next comment and the query. So this next comment says, this is your query again. It is for grabbing just one page worth of rows by applying the limit variable. So I say select ID, first name, last name, the date made from my testimonials table where approved equals 1, and I'm going to order all those results by ID descending. And then my limit syntax goes on the very end of the query. You can see what my limit syntax is made up of. Limit, then space, and it's going to be two numbers. And the first number is made by taking page num minus 1 and multiplying it by page rows, basically 10. because we made page rows 10 up here. Then the next number for your limit syntax is going to be 10, or whatever page rows, whatever value you made the page rows variable. Alright, so that is all of that explained. I can't explain it any clearer than that. And I'm telling you, if you don't understand what limit does in SQL syntax, then you're never going to understand this tutorial. Now finally, let's run that query. And the query reads MySQLi query, your database connection. And the second parameter again is your SQL syntax, which is right here. Now the next line, we're going to place in another comment that says this shows the user what page they are on and the total number of pages. So I named the variables text line 1 and text line 2, and we're going to be echoing these out to the page in just a moment. So the first text line 1 says testimonials, and then you're going to put the number of rows, the full amount of rows from the database. So if your database has 1,000 testimonials in it, that number will be right here. And then that would mean, since we're making 10 rows come out per page, that means you'll have 100 pages. So this last will be 100, and this page num will represent whatever page they're on. So text line 1 says testimonials, the full amount of testimonials, and text line 2 will show the user what page they're on out of how many pages there are total. In the very next line, we're going to put in the comment that says establish the pagination controls variable, and that's going to be equal to nothing when it's established. So we have a variable ready called pagination controls, and what we're going to do is add to that pagination controls variable to make all of the clickable numbers and the previous and next buttons and all that stuff. Now what I'm going to do is just make everything simple links, pretty much how you would see in Google style results. When you go to Google and you search, you can look at their pagination at the bottom, and we're going to make that style of pagination, or very similar to that. Now under that, we're going to put in another comment that says if there's more than one page worth of results. So let's put in an if condition here. If, open close parentheses, opening curly brace, go down a couple of lines and put in your closing curly brace. And we want to check to see if the last variable, which represents the last page, is not equal to 1. That means there's more than one page worth of results, because your database might only have 5 rows in it, and that means you would only have one page, which is the first page. So you really don't have to give them next and previous buttons or little links for numbers of pages to click, because there's only one page. So within this if condition is where we're going to build up this pagination controls variable, because only if there's more than one page worth of results are we going to render those little things at the bottom. Okay, now I'm going to put in a little multi-line comment. So this says first we check if we're on page 1. If we are, then we don't need a link to the previous page because we're on page 1, so there are no previous pages. And we don't need a link to the first page, which is page 1, so we do nothing because we're already on page 1, so you don't want to have a little link that says 1 to go to page 1. So if we aren't on page 1, then we generate some links to the first page and to the previous page. Well, really the number 1 will be paged out in our loop. So the if condition we need to check for all of that is if page num is greater than 1. And in that condition, the first thing we'll do is we'll say previous variable is equal to page num minus 1. And previous is a new variable that we haven't established yet in our script. It's just being established now. So the previous variable is equal to page num minus 1. So if you're on page 7, previous is going to represent page 6. And also the first little bit of rendering that you want in your pagination controls is going to be a link that is set to the server self. So whichever page you're on, it doesn't matter. You don't have to put the page name there. But you want to make sure you append to the URL the page number variable. That's the get variable, the URL variable. And you want to make sure that that is equal to the previous variable. Remember, like I said, if you're on page 7, you want to make sure that there's a link that says previous. So that's the label in the link. It's going to be the word previous, and it's going to be going to whatever the previous page is. Now we're going to place ourselves a comment under that says render clickable number links that should appear on the left of the target page number. So here we're going to use a for loop for that. So with the for loop, you're going to feed your for loop 3 parameters. The first parameter is what you want to start the index at. So I named the variable I, like we usually do in for loops, and that's going to be equal to page number minus 4. So if you're on page number 7, this I variable is going to equal 7 minus 4, which is what? 3. So in that case, if the user happens to be on page 7, this will represent a 3. Then the second parameter is our evaluation for the for loop, which is while I is less than the page num variable. So let's use that example of being on page 7 again. So if this would be equal to a 3, so that means this is saying while 3 is less than 7, then this loop is going to keep running. And the way that I gets incremented is your last parameter within the for loop, which is I++. So within the for loop, we just want a small condition that says if I is greater than 0, because we don't ever want a 0 to render in those little clickable links. So if I is greater than 0, our pagination controls is going to get more little links popped into it, and the pn variable is going to be equal to that I variable. And then you just put in the I variable there as the link label, and that's what gives you the little number that the person can click on. So basically this code right here gives you everything you need that is on the left side of your target number. So if you happen to be on page 7, we want to have 4 little links that go back to page 6, 5, 4, and 3 on the left side. And we also want a little word that says previous, so the person can use that as well. Now on the right side of the target page number, which let's say for example the user is on page 7, we want to have 4 more links that go to page 8, 9, 10, and 11. And then after that, we want the word next. So just remember that this code here renders everything on the left side of the target numbers. So we're going to go outside of this if condition right here. So down under that if condition, where that curly brace ends for that if condition, we're going to place in another comment that says render the target page number, but without it being a link, because that's the page that the person is going to be on, so you really don't want to have that be a link, and it can be styled any way you want, but we just really don't want to make it a link because they're already on that page, so there's no reason to make it a clickable link. So pagination controls, we're appending to that variable the value of page num and then a little space. Now after you show down in the pagination controls the actual page number that the user is on, then you're going to put in another comment that says render the clickable number links that should appear on the right of the target page number. We're going to use a for loop for that as well. Now let's pop that loop into place and I'll explain it real quick. And you pretty much have to understand how for loops work to really grasp the whole script. And once you understand how for loops work, which they're very simple, in our case they might look a little complicated here because we have a lot of different code at play. But if you look at a basic for loop, it's very simple to comprehend. So I would recommend, if you don't understand how for loops run, to research for loops in PHP. That way you can see it at its most basic level operating. For loops always get 3 parameters here. So the parameters for this for loop is going to be establishing the I variable again, or the index, if you will, of this for loop. And we're going to make this one equal to page num plus 1, the first pass of the loop. So if we're on page 7, this is going to be an 8. So I is going to be equal to 8. Then we say while 8 is less than or equal to whatever the last page is, then we're going to I++ and run the loop some more. And that's how we're going to get the 4 numbers on the right side of the target page in the pagination controls. While this loop is running, we just add little links to the pagination controls variable, and each link is going to have this I for loop index as its label. So if you happen to be on page 7, the first time this loop runs, it's going to render out an 8. The second time this loop runs, it's going to render out a 9. The third, a 10, and the fourth time it runs, it's going to render out an 11. Now this loop might have a larger ceiling than 4, so what I did is I just said if I is greater than or equal to page num plus 4, then we're going to break the loop, because really I only want this loop to run 4 times. So what I did was I just put an if condition here that breaks. It will stop this for loop from running after it runs 4 times. And I also put this if condition because this loop might only run twice. Because if you only have 10 pages, well, let's say you only have 9 pages worth of data and the user is on page 7, you don't want to render out page 8, 9, 10, and 11 because there's only 10 pages or 9 pages. So you definitely don't want the 10 and 11 numbers there, which is what would happen. So basically, in certain cases, this little if condition helps you break the for loop from running any further to render numbers out there that don't correspond to any pages that exist in your pagination. Now remember, in this condition we said if the page num is greater than 1, then and only then we're going to put a previous link and little numbers going back to previous pages. We're going to do the same thing down here in the last part of this if condition that started way up top here. So this if condition is going to have one last little bit of code popped into it. Let's pop that in right now. This does the same as above. This does the same as this condition right here, but for showing the next, the little next word, which is a feature that you might want in your pagination, is to have the word next after all those little numbers, just the same way you have the word previous before all of the little numbers. So if the page that they're on is not equal to the last page, then you definitely want to have the next button. But if they are on the last page, you don't render anything. So this code won't even run if they're on the last page. Only if they're not on the last page will this code run, and you'll get more stuff added to your pagination controls variable. And the way you make the next link is you just say page num plus 1. So if they happen to be on page 7, next equals page 8, and that's what gets put into your pn variable here. Now after all of that, you go down one line and make sure you're outside of your if condition that you said if last does not equal 1. You see where that ends right here. You go outside of that, and here's where you're going to render your while loop like you normally do for a MySQL result set. What we're going to do is first establish a variable called list, because that variable is going to be echoed out to the page. So we're going to compound that variable with all the data that we need for each little testimonial within this while loop. So basically you run your normal while loop here for this last query that was made right here. So this while loop will grab all of the rows that you need for that specific page that the user is requesting to see, those 10 items. So in the while loop, I'm going to grab the ID out of the database row. I'm going to grab the first name, the person's last name, the date that the testimonial was made, and then I'm just going to put the date made into a more human readable format, and then I'm going to make my little list, which each item in the list is going to be in a p tag because I want them separated a little bit down the page, and each one is going to have a link to the proper testimonial, which will render on testimonial.php, and the ID URL variable will be sunk in right there. And I'm going to show you guys all of this working in just a moment. So the label for that link is going to be the person's first name, last name, and the word testimonial. Then the link closes right there, and then I'll have some text that just says click the link to view the testimonial, or I could actually put some of the testimonial that they wrote in here. I could put a few lines in here if I want. You can put whatever you want in here from the database results. And then I put a break tag and I put written on the date made, and then I finally close my little paragraph tag for each one that renders. And then the very last thing, underneath your while loop, outside of it, you're going to write yourself a comment that says close your database connection. So we close our MySQLi database connection here because we don't need to be connected to the database any further past that point. Now let's go down into our HTML, where you can see we just have the bare bones still. There's nothing in our body tag, there's nothing in our style tag. So within the body tag, I'm going to place the following code, which is a div element, and in that div element I'm going to have an h2 heading, and instead of pagination top row, I got to change those to be text line 1. There's text line 1 there, and text line 2 is going to be placed here. First, we're going to have an H2 heading that shows the total amount of results from the database, and then the word paged. Then text line 2 is going to render right here, and I already explained what text line 1 and text line 2 are going to contain. Then in the next paragraph element, we're going to put the whole list. which these could be div elements or whatever you want. I just decided to put them in paragraph elements so they have a little margin space on the top and bottom. So here is your full list that's coming out of your while loop. Then finally, underneath all of that, we're going to put another div with an ID of pagination controls. And then inside of that, we're going to echo out the pagination controls variable. And that's what's going to put out the little previous, all the little numbers, and next. Now I'm going to put in some CSS that's going to affect the body element on the page just to make the font family what I want it to be. Then we're going to target the div down here called pagination controls. And in the pagination controls, we're going to make the font 21 pixels. And then any A elements that get rendered to the pagination controls box, those are going to be colored light blue. And we want to make sure that we give the pseudo selector of visited also a color of light blue, or else you might get different colors to your little numbers down there. And you might not want that. You might want them to stick to one uniform color. So what I'm going to do is run this exact script on my live server on Develop PHP and list out my testimonials with pagination. And you guys can see this exact script running, so you won't have any doubts to its speed, efficiency, or its working condition. So make sure I save that. I'm going to load it up to my server and run it. Alright, here I am at developphp.com, and let me pop in the URL to my test pagination example.php, and you can see what I have. It says testimonials. This is the text line 1. Testimonials 105 total paged. And then text line 2 says page 1 of 11 pages. Then you can see I have 10 different testimonials that I can click on and go read. If I click on this one, you can see that I have gone to that testimonial page. It's testimonial.php with an ID of 210. If I click on the next one down, I go to a different testimonial with an ID of 206. Now let's check down at the bottom of our page and look at the pagination controls. Now since we're on page number 1, we don't need to have a clickable link for page 1, and we don't need to even see the word previous on the left side. But what if I click page 2? Let's try that. You can see the previous appears. Now I have all new different testimonials for page 2 here, and it says page 2 of 11 in text line 1, or I mean text line 2. So the text line 2 variable is going to render out page 2 of 11 because we're on page 2. Now down here you can see that our dead link is actually the 2 now, which as it should be. So let's click page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7. So you see how that works? The further you go, your dead link is going to be in the very center, and you're going to have 4 links on either side. Now let's go to page 10 and make sure we don't have 4 more links that are showing up here because there's only 11 pages. So you don't want to have 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 to show up. You only want 11 to show up. So if I click on page 11 and if I go to the last page, I don't want the next link to show up, and I want my dead link to be the last page, which is 11 now. So if I go back to page 7, you can see that I have everything there showing that should be showing now. If I click 3, 1, everything works perfect, see? And you can see how fast that runs. It runs pretty freaking fast. And you guys have to remember that you have to clean your variables because people can manipulate what's in the URL. And Google is the same way. You can change the URL variables and go to whatever page you want sometimes. But if I want to go to page 6, I can just put it right there, press enter, and now I'm on page 6. It says page 6 of 11. You can see down here we're on page 6. So just keep in mind that people can change these URL variables very easily, and just press enter and your page is going to process whatever they type in. So if I type in poo-poo right there, I just want to make sure it goes to page 1, and our script is set up to filter all this stupid crap people might put in up top here. So your script is set up smart if you use this script, because it's going to filter out any stupid crap people try to put in up top to mess with your system. Okay, buddy? Alright. Okay, so I hope this tutorial has helped you wrap your head around pagination and all the little aspects that you might need to work into your scripts for PHP and whatever kind of database that you're pulling data out of. And you can also use this same logic that we used in this script if you want to use Ajax based pagination. So you'll see sometimes like Facebook and Twitter, they'll have like an Ajax based pagination to where the page never refreshes, and you can make just one little box show your pagination results on the page according to what people are clicking at the bottom. And if you guys want, I can maybe put together a script that shows Ajax based pagination without using any frameworks. It's pretty easy to script all of this stuff without using any frameworks, because PHP and JavaScript in their raw form are simple enough for children to use. And the only reason we use frameworks is when we don't know how to program something and we need to accomplish that task. But Ajax based pagination like Facebook and Twitter use is not very hard to wrap your head around, and I can show you how to do it without any frameworks. You won't have to use jQuery, you won't have to use any PHP frameworks like CodeIgniter or whatever people are using. It can all be raw code that you can fully wrap your head around and script yourself from scratch. And it doesn't take too much time. So my point is, if you want to see Ajax pagination from me, when you see it from other people, it's probably going to have jQuery and maybe other frameworks involved. If you want to see Ajax pagination from me, I'll make another tutorial for you guys. You just got to let me know.